Chapter 217 Origin. Chapter 217 Origin. When Sunny realized that he was dreaming, the first thing that came to his mind was that there was another soul tree growing somewhere near the White Arch. However, after a few moments of panic, he quickly dismissed this idea. After all, he had never actually dreamt while under the mind hex of the ancient fiend. He had just mistaken the broken memories of his conversation with Cassie for a dream. But this one was real. The dreamscape that surrounded Sunny was ephemeral, shifting, and shrouded in shadows. Above him, the sun was like a circle of darkness, with crimson light drowning in a burning sea of clouds. However, none of that light reached him. In the tenebrous hall of black marble, there was nothing but empty silence, which was now destroyed by the sound of a baby crying, of course. The woman's screams had long grown silent. Peering into the Stygian depths of the dark marble hall, Sunny saw nothing but endless shadows. The baby's cries were coming from somewhere beyond them, or from within them. A subtle thought entered Sunny's mind. The monumental walls, the colossal columns, the grandiose hall, all of it looked strangely familiar. As though he had already been here once, a long time ago. All that was missing were the signs of desolation and a large altar cut from a single block of black marble. In fact, it should have been standing right where the crying sounds were coming from. Familiar words appeared in his mind, now full of new meaning. Child of shadows? In the next moment, everything disappeared. The world was swaying. A seemingly endless surface of black stone was flowing past his vision, moving up and down. No, it wasn't the stone, but Sunny himself. He was the one swaying. What? In fact, Sunny found himself in the body of a toddler. He was currently held gently by a young woman who was walking down a long stone corridor, which was dimly lit by burning torches. Hence the swaying. The girl was very young, not older than Sunny himself, his actual body, that is. She was slender and exquisitely beautiful, with soft porcelain skin and long raven hair. The lissom beauty was dressed in a flowing silk tunic that left her delicate neck and shoulders exposed. A black serpent was coiled around her arms and neck, its scales so intricately tattooed that sometimes it seemed as though the creature was moving. Whoever marked the girl's skin with this image was a true genius of their craft. Sunny had never seen anything like it in the real world. However, he had seen similar markings in a nightmare. This was the mark of a slave who belonged to the Shadow God. The young girl was a temple slave, just like he had been in his first nightmare. The serpent coiled around her neck and arms served both as her collar and her shackles. She was also the toddler's mother. Sunny could tell from the love with which she held the child and the quiet smile that appeared on her face every time she looked at him. Sunny might have lost his own mother at a young age, but he still remembered that much, at least. If the mother is a slave, then the child is, too. Finally, Sunny began to understand what was happening to him. The dream he found himself in did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to the nameless temple slave whose role he had assumed during the first nightmare, the original child of shadows. This vision was his memory. Soon, the young girl entered a vast hall that was shrouded in darkness. Judging by the black marble walls, they were in another part of the ancient temple. Sunny couldn't see much of his surroundings, but he could somehow tell that they were underground. In the center of the hall, 7 tall braziers were burning with strange, pale flames. On the edges of light, motionless, stood a dozen or so people. Sunny shivered, suddenly reminded of the silent shadows populating his soul sea. However, these were not ghosts, but humans. There were several other slaves, while the rest appeared to be priests. To tell the truth, there was not a lot of difference between them. It seemed as though the servants of the Shadow God did not pursue opulence and status. In fact, many of the priests bore the same markings as the slaves, suggesting that they themselves had belonged to the temple once. What are they doing here? What is happening? Approaching one of the elder slaves, the young beauty entrusted the child to her. separated from the warmth of his mother's chest, the toddler. Sonny felt cold and scared. However, the older woman consoled him with gentle words, preventing the child from crying. Then, she moved back to stand with the rest of the people gathered in the underground hall. Their faces were calm and solemn. The young woman, meanwhile, slowly walked into the circle of light. Her movements were elegant, flowing, and graceful. Stopping at the very center, she stood motionlessly between the 7 pale flames, surrounded by 7 shadows. Sonny stared at the beautiful slave, feeling that something important was about to happen. But what? As he became pensive and uneasy, a sudden sound broke the silence. It was the deep and reverberating ringing of a zither. As the musical instrument sang, the slave girl suddenly moved. As she did, her 7 shadows moved with her. This is... With his eyes wide open, Sonny watched the young woman. She was dancing. The beautiful slave danced in the circle of light surrounded by impenetrable darkness, her every move full of indescribable grace and clear, but elusive purpose. Her young body was flexible and lithe, but also strong and trained as much as a warrior's. Her skill as a dancer was like that of a battle master. It was mesmerizing. The young woman weaved a beautiful pattern with her movements, their cadence and nature simultaneously firm and flowing, sharp and gentle, clear and unpredictable. She danced alone but also with 7 partners, effortlessly controlling both her own body and the 7 shadows cast by it. At times, it was hard to tell which one of them was real. Her dance was insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. Sonny froze. He recognized these movements. They were the same as how his shadow moved. This was the source and origin of the battle style he wanted to create. This was Shadow Dance. Chapter 2:18 Shadow Dance. Chapter 2:18 Shadow Dance. Sonny opened his eyes. The grand arch of white marble was exactly the same as when he had last seen it. The sun was already climbing the gray dome of the sky, chasing the remnants of the dark sea away. The rest of the cohort had woken up some time ago and were now preparing for the journey ahead. He had overslept. However, it didn't matter. With eyes burning with excitement, Sonny sat up and recalled everything that he had witnessed in his dream. The memories were still there, clear as day. He could recall every movement, every step, every breath of the dance that the beautiful slave had performed, the nameless slave's mother. His eyes dimmed slightly. That dream of his, while a precious gift, was also a source of numerous questions. Now that he was awake, Sonny was able to see a few things with more clarity. The scene that he had witnessed at the very beginning of it was that of the nameless slaves, the original child of Shadow's birth. He was born during a solar eclipse, not unlike Sonny. That fact put a lot of things into perspective. Everyone knew that the spell did not choose the role an aspirant would play during their first nightmare randomly. That was apparent from the fact that the bodies they inhabited in it, while different, were very close to their real ones. However, the actual principle of how the spell chose these roles and the events of the nightmares were largely unclear. But now, Sonny knew that he shared more than simply outer appearance with the temple slave whose body he inhabited for a few short days. Both of them were born in similar, extremely rare circumstances. Both of them were at the very bottom of society, oppressed and unwanted, surviving against all odds instead of because of them. Both of them were left without a family at a young age. The tough life in the outskirts took Sonny's parents and sister away. To the nameless slave, it was the servants of the mighty war god that destroyed his childhood home and life. Sonny didn't know what happened to the beautiful dancer after the last Temple of Shadows was destroyed by them, but he doubted that it was anything good. With a heavy sigh, he looked down. Fate. It was fate. What he shared with the temple slave was a similarity of fate. Sonny was growing more and more convinced that the spell was connected to the strings of fate in some way. Perhaps it was weaved from them. Remembering the void he had found himself in after completing his first trial, Sonny looked into the distance with wonder. That void was filled with a myriad of stars that served as nexuses for an inconceivably complex net made of countless strings of silver light. Were those the strings of fate? He shook his head. Whatever they were, and whatever the spell was, it was not something he could know or understand, yet. Numerous people, most of them better informed and smarter than him, had tried and failed. It was wiser to concentrate on something within his reach. The shadow dance. Sunny smiled. He wasn't so engrossed by the dancing of the beautiful slave girl because it was truly stunning and enchanting. He was riveted beyond belief by it because he recognized the pattern of the battle style hiding in his shadow and her graceful movements. Turns out, it wasn't a battle art at all. It was a dance. But was there a difference? Not in this case, not really. It wasn't a coincidence that people often described the way true masters of battle fought as dancing. At their core, fighting and dance were very close. That's why combat, when brought to a truly impressive level, was like a dance. So why couldn't a dance, when mastered to perfection, be like a battle art? Sunny was certain that he was right. He had already comprehended the essence of shadow dance and gained insight into its foundation. With the memory of the beautiful dancer moving as one with her 7 shadows, he now had the last piece of the puzzle. The actual set of moves and principles that he could use to create an actual battle style in their image. He didn't have the battle art yet, but he did now possess all the components needed to create it. Of course, it was not going to be easy. Even with all that knowledge stored in his mind, he would still have to spend a lot of time and effort and spill a lot of blood, both his own and that of his enemies, to turn the graceful dance of the beautiful slave girl into a deadly dance of steel. It wasn't even certain that he would succeed. But Sunny would be damned if he wasn't going to try. Shadow dance would become his personal battle art. He was going to make it happen. As if echoing his last thought, the familiar voice of the spell suddenly whispered into his ear. When Sunny heard what she said, his eyes widened. You have received an aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. Sunny stared into the emptiness, stunned to his core by what the spell had just whispered. Aspect legacy, did it really just say those words? He gulped. Aspect legacy was something that every aspect contained, but very few awakened ever received. Unlike the boon of the first nightmare, and every nightmare after that, as well as the reward sleepers received after returning from the dream realm for the first time, each aspect legacy had a unique set of requirements that the owner of the aspect had to meet to unlock it. When they did, they were rewarded with a powerful relic. Usually it was a memory that synergized perfectly with their aspect abilities, or sometimes even an echo. Legacy clans weren't called that accidentally. While not every clan possessed an aspect legacy, most of them did. In fact, it was the acquisition of the aspect legacy that laid the foundation for the creation of many of these clans. By now, some of the most powerful clans even had several. But getting an aspect legacy was not an easy feat. Most of them were received by saints, followed by master, and only a few were won by mere awakened. Getting the aspect legacy while still being a sleeper, that was simply unheard of. Just like getting a true name during the first nightmare, I guess. Sunny couldn't believe his luck. Of course, he worked bitterly hard to be able to grasp it. And yet, the magnitude of the harvest he reaped was utterly unbelievable. However, why was his aspect legacy not a memory, but a battle art? That was really strange. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the runes and hungrily searched for new ones. What he saw made him tremble. Chapter 219 Relics of the Past. Chapter 219 Relics of the Past. Right there in the glimmering field of familiar runes, in the cluster describing his aspect, a new string of them appeared. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. As soon as Sunny concentrated on the aspect legacy, new runes shined to describe it. Shadow Dance description, once an elegant dance, now a deadly battle art. This mysterious style was created by the treacherous Lost from Light after witnessing a graceful slave dancing with her shadows. Who else could have taken something so beautiful and turned it into something so vile? Sunny coughed, trying hard not to think too much about the manner in which the spell had described him. Again with this treacherous stuff, I'm not that treacherous, okay? So what if I lie, manipulate, and backstab people all the time? That's just being smart. However, what grabbed his attention was not the description itself, but what glimmered beneath it. Shadow Dance Mastery Level, 0 out of 7. First relic, unearned. Second relic, unearned. Third relic. There were a total of 7 lines of runes, each promising him a legacy relic once he achieved the corresponding level of mastery with his newly envisioned battle style points. 7 of them. Not 1, not even 2 or 3. But 7. Whole legacy clans were created around a single legacy relic. Sunny couldn't even imagine what he would be able to do with 7. Start a family and turn it into the most powerful clan in the world? No, that would mean putting all his eggs into one basket. Better create several clans, right? Why start a family when you can start 7? Wait, no, that didn't sound right. Right? Consumed by avarice, Sunny looked at the rising sun with an excited grin. This was great. This was incredible. However, his excitement was short-lived. Yeah, right. I would have to get back to the real world first. And that's not going to happen. Turning his head slightly, he stared at the distant silhouette of the Crimson Spire and lost himself in thought. A while later, Effie's voice brought him back to reality. Hey, doofus! Breakfast is ready. Why are spacing out and smiling like an idiot? Sunny answered without thinking. Just thinking about creating a legacy clan. Have you ever thought about creating a clan, huh, Effie? The robust huntress stared at him for a few seconds with a strange expression, and then grinned. Is that an invitation? Still lost in thought, Sunny tilted his head and glanced at her astutely. Not bad, not bad. The choice of a partner has to be of utmost importance when starting a legacy clan. Take Effie, for example. She is a very fearsome awakened. Her aspect is extravagant and powerful beyond belief. Plus, her physique is nothing short of divine. Any heir she gives birth to is bound to be both strong and gorgeous. A very suitable candidate, I guess. What? No, not an invitation. Just considering different options. At that moment, Sunny suddenly realized that he had been unceremoniously ogling Effie up and down for a better half of a minute, and that her grin had long turned dangerous at some point. The huntress stretched her neck and said lazily, I see. So you have chosen death. He blinked. No. Wait. I didn't mean it like that. I was just, theorizing. The unruly huntress cracked her knuckles and smiled menacingly. Oh, so you were theorizing. About me, huh? Do tell, do tell. No. Wait. Stop. STO. ****. Surprisingly, Sunny survived. Barely. Soon after that, they left the grandiose marble arch and continued their journey into the depths of the labyrinth. Before the expedition started, Nephi's had told him that they had a fast and comparatively safe way to reach the southern edges of the Forgotten Shore, as much as anything could be safe in this cursed place. Without it, getting to their destination would have taken them months. Now that they had left the Dark City, Sunny finally decided to satisfy his curiosity, and asked what that mysterious method of traveling with incredible speed was. When he heard the answer, he just stared blankly at Changing Star for a few minutes, trying to guess if she was kidding or not. She wasn't. In the end, he didn't even ask any questions and just waved his hand dejectedly. There was no point. If Nephi's had come to know of this secret from Cassie's visions and believed that it was doable, then he did not have to worry too much. It's not like he could turn back now anyway. Plus, the expedition had shown itself to be extremely lucrative for him so far. Mere days after its start, he had already gotten plenty of shadow fragments and an ascended memory, not to mention making a breakthrough in his exploration of battle styles and earning an aspect legacy for his effort. In any case, they had to travel about a week's worth of time south to get the chance to access that fast method of travel. The heights they were going to use on the way as shelters during the nights they were planned in advance with the help of the Forgotten Shore map Nephi's had created. To make sure that these shelters were really where the map showed and remove any possibility of ending up stranded in the middle of the labyrinth with no way to escape the dark sea, she had even employed Kai during the week that Sunny had spent with Effie. The charming archer scouted the way ahead and confirmed that her map was correct. Now, the only danger they really faced from the Forgotten Shore itself was that of a sudden storm. However, with a true oracle in the ranks of the cold. Chapter 220 So you're a spider, so what? Chapter 220 So you're a spider, so what? As they ventured deeper into the southern reaches of the Crimson Labyrinth, the situation slowly turned worse and worse. The iron spiders that had been not too threatening to the cohort of powerful, experienced Dark City hunters at the start of it all were growing more and more deadly with each step of the way. Their numbers grew exponentially, becoming a real danger pretty soon. More and more often bigger and stronger monsters appeared at the head of the attacking beasts, bringing with them all sorts of problems. What's worse, the spiderweb they used to trap their prey was changing, too. The metal wires from which it was weaved became so thin that it was at times almost impossible to notice it, and sharp enough to cut through armor and bone, while maintaining the resilience of superb steel. The whole labyrinth was covered in it, turning from crimson to dull gray. The cohort bled much more because of the invisible webs than they did because of the spiders themselves. Of course, the iron spiders were cunning creatures, too. More often than not, they only attacked once one of the humans was caught in their nets, leading to a few really harrowing experiences for the members of Changing Star's party. And there was a wide variety of other terrifying creatures waiting to ambush them in the twisting pathways of the Crimson Coral, too. What made them so dangerous was that the cohort didn't know anything about their anatomy and abilities. Every fight was a gamble, often resulting in one or several of them sustaining serious wounds. There were three things that made the situation somewhat bearable. The first one was Nephi's and her healing flames. Although using the aspect ability took a toll on their leader, it was often worth it, especially if one of the members of the cohort received wounds that limited their mobility. One thing was far more dangerous than any nightmare creature that lived in the labyrinth, and it was not reaching safety before the torrent of black water flooded the Forgotten Shore, bringing inconceivable horrors with it. Thanks to Neph, they didn't have to worry about anyone slowing the cohort down. The second reason, unexpectedly, was the iron spiders themselves. Because of the peculiar way they hunted, a lot of creatures found their deaths in the cutting embrace of the wire spiderwebs. Finding these eviscerated corpses or cocoons containing old carcasses became a common occurrence once the party invaded the depths of the spider territory. Thanks to that, 6 humans were able to study and anticipate many of the monsters they had to face in this region of the labyrinth. A lot of potentially deadly surprises had been avoided due to the cohort stumbling onto a corpse of a similar creature prior to fighting against a living one and spending some time to learn about its strengths and weaknesses. The third reason was the blood arrow. In the hands of an experienced archer, it was almost as deadly as it would have been in the hands of an inexperienced one, the difference being that the latter would mostly be a danger to themselves, quickly turning into a bloodless husk. The first time Kai had used it, Sunny experienced a disturbing feeling of shock. That time, they were facing a large group of iron spiders led by a much larger arachnid, the awakened monster of their tribe, similar in status to a carapace centurion. These creatures were much heavier and more powerful, with thick plates of iron armor covering their bodies almost completely. Even Castor's enchanted sword had trouble cutting through their defenses. What's worse, due to the speed with which the wretched abominations moved, it was especially hard to catch them in a gap between the armor plates. Sunny was facing 2 smaller iron spiders at once while the Stone Saint was butchering the third one. With his shadow observing what was happening behind his back, he didn't miss the moment when the cunning awakened monster suddenly disengaged from Nephi's and dashed into his direction, its mandibles moving in anticipation of tasting human flesh. Calmly preparing to dodge, Sunny tensed his muscles and narrowed his eyes. Whistling over his shoulder, a menacing black arrow suddenly streaked through the air. Its shaft was made out of dark polished wood, with black feathers for fletching and a vicious white arrowhead that seemed to be cut from pale white bone, like a sharp fang of some terrible creature. The arrow easily pierced the thick iron plate protecting the spider and tore deep into his body. Even though Kai messed up his shot a bit and hit the monster in its abdomen instead of the head, the results were nothing short of harrowing. In the next moment, the awakened monster suddenly slowed down and staggered. Then, it tried to lunge forward once again, but ended up losing its balance and weakly falling to the ground. Its limbs moved slightly, quickly losing any form of cohesion. Their movements grew slower and slower and then stopped. Beneath the iron plates, the spider's body grew taut and shriveled, like that of a mummy. Soon, it seemed completely drained. Sonny blinked, shaken by this disturbing image, and couldn't help but glance briefly at his forearm. If not for the blood weave, he might have ended up as a shriveled corpse. He would have gone through with cutting off his arm and survived, most likely. But if he had been a couple of seconds too late, better not to think about. Anyway, he was glad that the blood arrow was on their side now. Not too far away from him, gliding through the air, Kai suddenly made a strange gasping sound. Sonny didn't know what it felt like to have your blood magically drained and then suddenly return to your body, but he doubted that it was pleasant. Also, there was this question: if Kai's blood was used to create the arrow and then returned to him, if he had hit his mark, of course, then where did the blood drained from the prey went? He wasn't sure that he wanted to know. In any case. With Nightingale in possession of the morbid ascended memory, their battles with iron spiders and other inhabitants of the labyrinth became a bit less perilous. The blood arrow did not have any enchantments that needed to be activated by manipulating soul essence, so the charming archer could use it to its full potential. Although Sonny was still a bit bitter about having to give such a menacing weapon away, he was now more confident than ever that his decision was the right one. Just like that, 6 more days passed by. During this time, he didn't gain any new memories, but managed to accumulate 18 more shadow fragments, bringing his total to 340. He was still not as strong physically as he had been before creating the Shadow Saint, but getting closer and closer. In the evening of the 6th day, bloodied and exhausted, the cohort had finally approached the goal of the first leg of their expedition. Looking at it, Sonny couldn't help but stop in his tracks. His eyes slightly widened. Of course. Chapter 221 Zenith. Chapter 221 Zenith. In front of them, the ground was shattered, creating a titanic fracture. The canyon was so deep and vast that Sonny had to strain his eyes to see the other side of it. Crimson coral clung to its walls, spilling over the edge like a torrent of blood. A long time ago, a graceful bridge of white stone connected the two sides of the canyon together. Now, however, it was broken, with only its base remaining in place. Looking at the bridge, Sonny realized that there must have been an ancient road somewhere beneath their feet. It led directly to the main gates of the ancient city, moving across the colossal canyon by means of the miraculous bridge and passing beneath the grandiose arch of white marble. Come to think of it, the headless knight, the ashen barrow, and the graceful woman whose hands had saved him twice were also situated in a straight line. Perhaps there was another road leading east, too. However, this thought disappeared from his head as quickly as it had appeared. All his attention was drawn to the remnants of the stone bridge, where stood another giant statue. Right above the weathered ruins stood a colossal stone warrior. He was clad in an archaic cuirass, with a beautiful spear resting on his shoulder. The warrior was facing south, as though greeting the travelers who traveled on the road to reach the ancient city. Of course, his head was missing. More than that, the whole statue was covered in vast sheets of dull gray spiderweb, as if dressed in a solemn burial shroud. Sonny shivered, afraid to imagine what kind of creature was capable of creating the thick metal cables of the web that encompassed the stone colossus. Noticing his expression, Effie smiled. Scary, huh? Sonny gave her a nod, hoping against all hope that they would not have to find out the answer to his question. For once, his hopes were not shattered to pieces. The vivacious huntress sighed. I haven't seen it myself, but I heard stories of the creature that used to make its nest here. It was the mother of all these damnable spiders we've been dealing with for the past week. A huge menace of a nightmare creature, as big as a house and utterly deadly. Armored like a hover tank, too. Sonny gulped and cast a sideways look at Nephi. What's a hover tank? Effie blinked a couple of times, then answered in an amused tone. Oh, right. You're a school dropout, I almost forgot. You've seen a PTV before, right? PTV stands for a personal transport vehicle, as you know. I hope. Well, a tank is sort of like that, only much bigger and heavier, with thick armor and a kinetic or energy cannon installed on it. The government sometimes employs them to support Awakened when a gate opens near populated areas. Sonny tried to imagine such a vehicle and hazily remembered seeing something like this on the news when he was a kid. Mostly, these tanks Effie had described were shown open like tin cans, with their crews pulled out and eaten by attacking monsters. He shivered. Mundane people had no business fighting against nightmare creatures. To be completely honest, even Awakened had no business facing them. It's just that they had no other choice. We're not going to try and kill that big spider, are we? Effie laughed. Actually, it's your lucky day. We won't be meeting the spider mommy. In fact, no one ever will. She's long dead. Sonny sighed with relief and glanced at the huntress. Yeah, great. But how do you know? She shrugged. She was killed by the second ruler of the Bright Castle, before he went and got himself killed trying to conquer the Crimson Spire. The huntress who showed me the ropes when I arrived on the Forgotten Shore had actually been one of the members of his cohort once, if you can believe it. In fact, she was the one who dealt the finishing blow to that abomination. Effie looked at the giant mass of spiderwebs and shook her head. It must have been one hell of a battle, huh? Anyway, I'm glad that she did. That's how she received the Zenith Shard, which I then inherited. Sonny frowned. What exactly are you talking about? The huntress leaned on her beautiful bronze spear and patted its shaft. My spear. It's a Tier 5 awakened memory, so the big bad spider was an awakened tyrant, I guess. Can you imagine? All these creepy crawlers serving a sentient commander. Thank gods it's dead. Sonny looked at her with a dubious expression. Why would that mentor of yours give away such a treasure? Effie was silent for a few moments, then smiled. We were kind of close. Plus, she had no idea how to use a spear. Sorcerers, am I right? In any case, she gave the Zenith Shard to me. Despite her carefree tone, he could tell that that smile was fake. Effie did not let it show, but Sonny could tell that the death of this huntress whose name he didn't even know had affected her more than she was telling. Who knows? Since Effie's original cohort had perished in the catacombs, their corpses might still be somewhere there, in those cursed tunnels. However, something else was on his mind. Sonny furrowed his brow. Midnight Shard, Zenith Shard. Was there a connection? He didn't know. There might have been. He had received the Midnight Shard from Nephi, who had gotten it after killing the Carapace demon. The demon, even though it had been enthralled by the Soul Devourer, appeared as the leader of the nightmare creature in that region of the labyrinth, just like the brood mother of the iron spiders had been two headless statues. Two powerful abominations, two memories with similar names. Wasn't it a little bit too much to be a coincidence? Glancing at Effie, he asked. Was your spear forged from a shard of a fallen star, by chance? Just as he said it, Cassie slightly turned her head, listening to their conversation. That small detail told Sonny everything he wanted to know. The huntress raised her eyebrows. It was, at least according to its description. Who told you? A corner of Sonny's lips slightly curled upward. No one. I just guessed. With that, he left Effie alone and walked forward. It seemed as though he was right. There was some hidden meaning behind the names of these two memories. Cassie seemed to know something about it, and that meant that Nephi did, too, And yet they chose to keep it from Sunny and the rest of the cohort. He sighed. So this expedition is not as simple as it seems. Not that it ever seemed particularly simple. To begin with, he had guessed a long time ago that Changing Star had some hidden motive to want to leave the Dark City, but now, his suspicions were as good as confirmed. The smile disappeared from Sunny's face. He didn't like being kept in the dark. At all. Kept in the dark, huh? Oh, the irony! At that moment, his shadow reached the base of the giant statue. With a deep frown, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard and glanced at Nephi's, putting all needless thought aside. There's a nest ahead. We will have to destroy it to access the statue. Lots of spiders, some bigger ones, too. She gave him a nod and turned to face the others. We need to clear the nest and climb the statue before the sun sets. Prepare for battle. Chapter 222 Clearing the Nest. Chapter 222 Clearing the Nest. A clear and melodic sound of a ringing bell reverberated through the air above the labyrinth, alerting the monstrous spiders hiding in the enormous cocoon of gray webs that a new prey came knocking on their door. Moments later, swift bodies clad in heavy plates of iron armor shot from beneath the gray spiderweb, moving through the steel wires with terrifying speed. There were enough nightmare creatures in that wave to obliterate anything that stood in their way, seemingly. However, what stood in their way were two figures, one tall and boisterous, the other one on the shorter side and radiating a strange feeling of indifferent firmness. They were Effie and the Stone Saint. Both held their shields raised, the tips of their weapons resting on their edges. As the huntress grinned, the shadow silently struck the rim of her shield with the blade of her sword twice. As if answering that call, a vicious black arrow suddenly appeared from somewhere above, hitting the leading spider right in one of its many eyes. The monster's legs buckled, and it fell to the ground, forcing those creatures that followed behind to either dash around or jump over the massive body. A fraction of a second later, the wave of spiders crashed into the small shield wall. A deafening roar of iron striking against iron resounded under the gray skies of the forgotten shore like a thunderclap. Despite the furious force of the assault, Effie and the Stone Saint somehow held, at least for now. As soon as the momentum of the iron spiders was slowed down a little, Nephis and Castor appeared out of nowhere and attacked the mass of repulsive creatures from the sides. At the same time, a stone-like sword and a beautiful bronze spear lashed out from behind the shields. Black blood splashed into the air. Meanwhile, Sunny softly landed on the ground behind the nightmare creatures and stealthily moved through the shadows, swiftly approaching them from the back. The Midnight Shard flashed, sending one of the spiders into the embrace of death. You have slain an awakened beast. Without listening to the spell, Sunny used the precious moments before the enemy noticed his presence to wreak as much havoc as possible. His Tachi moved twice more, severing several limbs and heavily wounding another abomination. After that, the spiders finally reacted to his treacherous attack. Not treacherous, just smart. With Effie and the Stone Saint holding the front, Nephis and Castor attacking from the sides, and Sunny closing the trap from behind, the monstrous arachnids were now surrounded from all sides. Well, sort of. Of course, a small group of dormant humans could never hope to truly surround this many superior nightmare creatures, not even with the help of a monster of their own. Trapped or not, as soon as the iron spiders had the time to react, they could easily overwhelm and tear them to pieces. Especially Sunny, who was behind the line, these vicious creatures, and all alone. If the spiders decided to shift the focus of their attack, he would be dead in seconds. As another black arrow hit one of the larger spiders in the abdomen, Sunny hissed and dove under a spider's scythe, then thrust his sword forward, ruthlessly piercing the head of the beast through its open, salivating mouth. You have. With no time to tear the Midnight Shard from the spider's core, Sunny let go of its hilt and jumped back, narrowly avoiding being crushed by another ironclad creature. The few seconds of the advantage they had were coming to an end. A moment or two later, the spiders were bound to come to their senses. Even though the cohort had managed to kill 10 or so in this short window of time, there were still enough of the deadly creatures to rip them to shreds. Sunny didn't even have to look at Nephi's to feel the shift in her movements. The silent understanding the two of them developed during their journey through the labyrinth many months ago was still there, allowing them to cooperate perfectly without the need to use any words, as though they were two parts of the same whole. In fact, despite the rift in their relationship, this bond was stronger than ever. Perhaps because they understood each other so much better now, for better or for worse. It was so exhilarating to fight side by side with Changing Star once again. Just before the spiders were able to turn the tide of the battle in their favor, Effie and the Stone Saint, who was following Sunny's command, suddenly moved to the sides. Nephi's, Castor, and Sunny braced themselves. Behind the improvised shield wall stood Cassie. She was holding a wooden staff in her hands, while an elegant rapier hovered in the air above her shoulder. The tip of the rapier pointed directly at the spiders. As though following the direction of the quiet dancer's blade, Cassie moved her staff and activated its enchantment. Immediately, a powerful gust of hurricane winds slammed into the mass of the nightmare creatures, sending several of them reeling and throwing clouds of dust into the air. Of course, it wasn't strong enough to truly throw these abominations off their balance, or damage them in any way. However, that wasn't the plan. Spider-kin of these creatures back on Earth had a uniquely powerful sense of hearing. Which was rather strange, considering that they had no organs that resembled theirs at all. The truth of the matter was that spiders were able to feel the vibrations of sound waves. They were also masterful architects, using the vibrations and the specially created threads weaved into their webs to sense the movements of their prey from afar. These nightmare creatures were much the same. As the powerful wind threw dust into the air and made every wire of every surrounding spiderweb vibrate all at once, they were momentarily disoriented. The members of the cohort were waiting for this exact moment. Instantly, they attacked with ferocious determination, spilling rivers of viscous black blood onto the ground. Sunny himself had already gotten his austere sword back, and now used its razor-sharp blade to gut the beast that had forced him to retreat a couple of seconds ago. You have slain. By the time the iron spiders came back to their senses, their numbers were significantly diminished. But there were still so many of them. After that, the battlefield became consumed with chaos. There was no time for plans or tactics anymore. Every member of the cohort had to face off against multiple opponents, fighting with desperate resolve against enemies that surpassed them both in terms of personal power and numbers. Only the Stone Saint was calm and indifferent, moving through the ranks of the iron spiders like a graceful incarnation of pure darkness. The battle fell apart into several small pockets of fearsome violence. Ka was trying to support his companions from above, but with how intense the fighting got, he was having trouble finding the opportunities to take shots without risking hitting them. He was too afraid to take a risk, knowing all too well how harrowing the effects of the blood arrow were. If even the nightmare creatures of higher rank were doomed to succumb to a torturous death after being wounded by the ghastly memory, humans like them had no chance of surviving. For now, people on the ground were on their own. Sunny was struggling against two ironclad abominations, gritting his teeth in exasperation. The damn bastards were too fast to reliably hit them in the gaps in armor, and too damn powerful to face them directly. As the result, he was forced to constantly dance between the two of them, dodging the whirlwind of strikes that rained on him from all sides. Curses! Jumping back, he held the midnight shard with one hand and used another to throw the prowling thorn in the direction of one of the spiders. The creature easily dodged the kunai and continued its attack, threatening to slice Sunny's hand clean off. He had no choice but to retreat once again. Behind the menacing beast, the throwing dagger continued to spin. A few moments later, it cut a smooth arch in the air and flew back, as if turning into a boomerang. Sadly, just like the spiders back on Earth, these repulsive creatures had an almost absolute field of vision. The second spider simply moved its head down at the last moment without even bothering to turn it, dodging the heavy kunai that approached it from behind. But Sunny was never trying to wound the nightmare creatures with the prowling thorn, to begin with. Instead, he wanted to let them taste their own medicine. A moment later, the invisible string of his kunai drew taut, wrapped around two massive bodies. Just like prey used to be caught in their webs, the iron spiders were now caught by the invisible string of the prowling thorn, tripping over it and crashing into each other. Sunny dashed forward and let the midnight shard sing. The graceful blade flashed twice, sending two ugly spider heads spinning into the air. You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger. Kicking one of the heads away, Sunny swiftly glanced around, searching for a new enemy. But there were none. You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. The gargantuan cocoon of steel spiderwebs was empty. Corpses of its previous inhabitants littered the ground, oozing with black blood. The cohort had cleared the entire nest full of awakened abominations. And no matter how incredible, this was the undeniable truth. They had won. Chapter 223 Natural Selection. Chapter 223 Natural Selection. The danger was gone, so Sunny allowed himself to tiredly kneel on the ground, his breathing heavy and laborious. The strenuous battle against the host of spiders had not lasted long, but he was utterly exhausted. The intensity of these perilous minutes was enough to bring anyone down to their knees. Too weak. I am still too weak. With a heavy sigh, he summoned the runes and glanced at the number of shadow fragments. Shadow fragments, 362/1000. Not bad. Clearing the nest had given him 22 fragments, 10 for the 5 iron spiders he had killed himself, and another 12 for those slain by the Shadow Saint. With the taciturn monster serving as his murderous pet, the speed with which Sunny was able to accumulate power was twice as fast, at least. If things continued like this, the Stone Saint was going to return his investment of 100 shadow fragments in no time. If I live long enough. With a grimace, Sunny dismissed the midnight shard and slowly got up. The sun was already rolling down toward the horizon, so they had to hurry with collecting soul shards from the corpses of the iron spiders. There were a lot of corpses. Cutting one of the beasts open with the prowling thorn, Sunny struggled with the idea that they had eviscerated this many nightmare creatures. Of course, he had expected this much. After all, Nephias and Sunny had been able to fight against 2 or 3 carapace scavengers back when it was only the 2 of them. Both of them were much weaker, less experienced, and barely equipped with memories back then, too, now that they had spent 7 whole months in the dream realm, many times more than most sleepers ever had to, and tempered themselves against the perilous hellscape of the Forgotten Shore. Both their skill and level of power had dramatically increased. Add the fact that there were 2 other powerhouses fighting alongside them, as well as Nightingale and the menacing Stone Saint, and the outcome of the battle ceased to be that surprising. And yet, observing the carnage that they had left if their wake still made Sunny doubt his eyes. These were awakened nightmare creatures still. The real reason why the cohort had won did not lie in the individual prowess of its members, but in their ability to cooperate and control the battlefield. The iron spiders were powerful and deadly, but at the end of the day, they were still mindless beasts. That's why they had allowed themselves to be surrounded and trapped. Had they been commanded by a creature of a higher class, one that was as cunning and smart as the humans it faced, things would have turned out very differently. Sunny sighed. Come to think of it, the labyrinth was a curious place. It teemed with abominable creatures of all kinds, but almost all of them were of the mindless variety. The only 2 exceptions he knew about were the carapace demon and the spider matriarch, who had been either a devil or a tyrant. Perhaps it was just the nature of this place. Nothing too big and strong could escape from the flood of black water that drowned the world every night. Only comparatively small monsters were able to run away or hide, both from the dark sea itself and from the hungry terrors that inhabited it. These monsters were an almost insurmountable threat to those unfortunate young people who were sent to this forsaken hell by the spell, but by the standards of the Forgotten Shore itself. They were nothing but insects, a horde of parasites who fed on the crumbs left behind by the true masters of this place. What a depressing thought. This notion poured cold water on Sunny's pride over their achievement. Well, Whatever, soon they were done with the gruesome job of fishing out the soul shards out of the dead spiders. While Nephias was dividing the spoils among the members of the cohort, Sonny used the chance to dive into his soul sea and inspect the memory he had received during the battle. It turned out to be a cloak weaved from spider silk. Judging from the description, the cloak could provide him with a small amount of protection against physical attacks, simple by virtue of being very hard to piece. Without thinking too much, Sonny fed the cloak to the stone saint. It was just a Tier 1 memory, so no amount of protection it could provide would be of any help in this damned place. He would also rather kill himself than go into a battle while wearing a cloak. There were easier and less painful ways to die, plus, it was white. Didn't exactly go along with the dark gray fabric of the puppeteer's shard, not to mention being a hindrance to anything having to do with stealth. The stone saint absorbed another shadow fragment, at least. Receiving his share of the soul shards and entrusting them to Effie, who had more than enough space in her enchanted bag, Sonny glanced at Nephias. Changing Star was looking at the sun, calculating something in her head. After a few moments, she sighed and said, "We still have some time. Let's explore the nest before ascending the statue." Sonny grinned. As an amateur explorer, this was exactly what he wanted to hear. The nest was formed by endless wires of the strange metal web and resembled a vast sphere. It was built around one of the legs of the stone colossus, effectively blocking the path to the bridge. The entrance was situated high above the ground, and extremely wide. Looking at the diameter of that hole gave Sonny an understanding of just how big the spider matriarch had been. He shivered. The second lord of the castle had been a very powerful individual. Sonny didn't even want to imagine what the battle with the giant arachnid must have looked like. Inside, it was dark and damp. Drops of black water were falling from above, creating an ominous melody. Peering into the darkness, Sonny suddenly stumbled and froze for a moment. This, he didn't expect. Chapter 224 Pyre. Chapter 224 Pyre. Inside the giant nest of spiderwebs, a desiccated corpse of the colossal matriarch lay shriveled on the floor, its iron carapace shattered by some devastating blow. The creature was long dead, but the sight of it was still terrifying. The vast abdomen of the broodmother, however, appeared to have been severed much later than her fatal battle against the lord of the Bright Castle. It almost looked as if it was torn apart from within. Inside the terrifying wound, Sonny noticed the shattered remnants of 5 giant, metallic eggs. The size of them was about the same as that of the 5 monstrous fallen beasts that had destroyed the original Stone Saint and her brethren back in the Dark City. So, that was where they came from. Looking away with a shiver, Sonny noticed numerous cocoons of spiderwebs attached to the walls of the nest all around the dead matriarch. Inside them, withered carcasses of nightmare creatures of all shapes and sizes were preserved in a strangely good condition. This was a true museum of terror. The nightmare creatures appeared as though they were kept alive inside the cocoons for a long, long time before finally succumbing to death and turning into mummified corpses. Perhaps the abominable spider stored them there for later consumption. Or not. Noticing a few cocoons that had been broken open and what was inside of them, Sonny had to try hard to stop himself from vomiting. The iron spiders did not use the monsters caught in the cocoons for food, they used them as incubators. The creatures in the broken cocoons had been devoured from within. A few of them still had hundreds of small, moist eggs embedded into their flesh, with embryonic spiderlings moving weakly behind the slightly transparent shells. Curse it all! Damn these spiders, damn the labyrinth, damn the forgotten shore, and especially damn the damned nightmare spell that had brought him here. Sonny suddenly felt tired of this long, feverish, never-ending nightmare he had found himself in. But the worst was still to come. He was the first to notice it. With a dark grimace suddenly appearing on his face, Sonny called out to his companions. Then, he led them deeper into the nest, where, attached to the wall, hung a cocoon that was different from all the others, because this one hid a rough silhouette of a human body. The 6 of them stood somberly around the cocoon, each consumed by their own dark thoughts. Finally, Nephi turned her head to Castor and said, "Can you sword cut it open?" With a short nod, the proud legacy summoned the enchanted Jian and took a step forward. Approaching the cocoon, he stopped and hesitated for a few moments. "Be careful." Glancing back at Changing Star, Castor lingered for a second, and then faced the cocoon with grim determination written on his face. As ghostly green light emanated from the blade of his sword, he swung it with the graceful precision of an expert swordsman. The tip of the jian cut through the metal wires of the cocoon, splitting it open. A shriveled human body fell to the floor, making the legacy jump back. Nephi, Castor, and Sunny stared at it, their faces pale and full of ghastly resentment. Then, Sunny bent over and emptied the contents of his stomach. This was just too much. The young man whose corpse they found in this harrowing place did not die an easy death. In fact, being eaten alive from the inside by 100 of tiny nightmare creatures was probably the worst fate imaginable. At least Sunny couldn't think of anything worse. But even worse still, he recognized the dead sleeper. His face was strangely intact, with an expression of horrifying agony frozen on it forever. Despite the overall condition of the corpse, Sunny knew who it was just from one look. It was the young man who had attended the academy with them, the one who had called him a shorty when Sunny first approached Castor to create the impression that he was a boastful lunatic. Looking at their condition, Effie frowned. "Did you guys know him?" After a few moments of silence, Castor slowly nodded. "Yes. His name was Stephen. He was the youngest heir of the Pandavar clan. Stephen." Sunny had not even bothered to learn the name of this arrogant young man back when they were preparing to venture into the dream realm at the academy. In fact, he had really disliked him, and for a good reason. But looking at the hideous, terrifying corpse in front of him, he had forgotten all about it. Sunny would never wish this fate on anyone, let alone one of his fellow students. Slowly, a solemn mood overtook the cohort. They had already known that the other 3 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore this year never made it to the Dark City, which meant that they had perished somewhere in the labyrinth. However, finding one of them served as a stark reminder of how fragile their own lives were. Who knew what would happen to them in the future? If not today, death could be waiting for them tomorrow. Perhaps years from now, it would be their corpses that someone would stumble upon by accident. Sometime later, Nephi gritted her teeth and turned away. Then, she said, her voice suppressed and hollow, "We need to leave. The sun is setting." Her words broke the silence and brought everyone back from their grim reveries. Castor lingered for a few minutes, then spoke in a hesitant tone. Aren't we going to bury him?" Changing Star shook her head. "There's not enough time. I also don't want anyone touching the bodies infected with these eggs. It's too dangerous." The members of the cohort looked at each other. No one had a reasonable objection, but it felt wrong to just leave their fellow human here. Finally, Nephi sighed. A complicated expression appeared on her face, and then she said, "All right. Go. I'll catch up with you guys later." Sunny stared at her for a few moments, and then slowly turned away. One after another, the 5 of them glanced at Changing Star and left, leaving her alone with the dead young man and numerous cocoons, each hiding a slain nightmare creatures. As soon as the last member of the cohort climbed out of the nest, a beam of pure radiance suddenly shot from the dark hole of its entrance, followed by a wave of scorching heat. The purifying fire unleashed by Changing Star engulfed the remains of their fellow student and then spread to the numerous cocoons, the nightmare creatures inside of them, and even the corpse of the spider matriarch herself. The insides of the nest turned into an incandescent, incinerating furnace. Everything inside of it was doomed to be annihilated and turned to ashes. A few minutes later, the whole structure was consumed by furious white flames. Nephi had escaped the burning nest shortly after the rest of her cohort, her face pale and tired. Leaving the grandiose funeral pyre behind, they began ascending the statue of the ancient warrior. The night was approaching. Chapter 225 On the Shoulders of Giants. Chapter 225 On the Shoulders of Giants. Once they climbed all the way to the broad shoulders of the statue and found a suitable place to make camp, everyone looked down without having to say anything. Far below them, the giant nest was still aflame. The cables that constituted it were melting and turning into rivers of liquid metal, flowing down from the edges into the vast abyss of the canyon. The turbulent black waters were rising from below to meet them. When the two streams met, one lightless, the other incandescent, billowing columns of hot vapor shot into the air. For a few moments, it seemed as though light and darkness were on equal footing. But then the cursed sea rose from the depths of the canyon in a surge and washed away the brightness of melting iron away. The flood of blackness crashed into the burning nest, dousing it. A minute or so later, the white flames were gone. The surface of the dark sea continued to rise, as though nothing had ever happened. Sunny sighed and turned to Nephi. Now that they had reached their goal, it was time to face the real danger. With a grim expression on his face, he asked, "So, now what?" He knew the general concept of how she was planning to reach the southern edges of the Forgotten Shore in a short time, but not the details. Changing Star glanced at him, lingered for a moment, and then said, "We arrived at the canyon faster than I expected. There are still 2 days left before we can act. So, make yourself at home. We'll rest tomorrow and start preparing for it the next day." Sunny smiled. Rest, that sounded swell. Plus, he wasn't really looking forward to making use of the fast and comparatively safe method of traveling through the labyrinth that Nephi had talked about. In fact, he would rather never have to use it at all. Just like that, the cohort found itself with nothing to do for the next 2 days. Before leaving the Dark City, Changing Star had anticipated that various things could slow them down and padded the schedule of the expedition with extra time. Who knew that they would actually make it to the broken bridge so fast? In any case, Sunny wasn't complaining. He had a lot to do and think about. For example, the mysterious connection between his Tachi, Effie's spear, and the headless statues that stood around the Forgotten Shore. The statues represented the 7 valiant heroes that had made an oath to return light to this cursed land thousands of years ago. Sunny had seen 3 of them by now, the knight, the graceful woman, and now this mighty warrior. Did every statue have a connection with a specific memory? If so, what was that connection and why was Nephi so reluctant to share this information with everyone? Well, it wasn't like he and Changing Star were very close now. Sunny had drawn a clear line to denote the nature of their relationship himself. He insisted that he was not a true member of the cohort, but merely a hired specialist. Why would she share her secret with him? This was a logical conclusion, but Sunny couldn't help but feel a bit resentful. Despite the fact that he was her first partner, now, the situation had changed. Nephi had other people to rely on. Like Castor. So why would she say that Sunny was the only person she trusted on the Forgotten Shore except for Cassie, and then hide her technique from Castor? Everything felt so complicated. In any case, there was an invisible line drawn between the core members of the hunting party and the outsiders. Sunny and Kai. No one consciously avoided them. But it was clear that the line existed. When all was said and done, the 4 true members of the cohort preferred each other's company. That's why Sunny and Kai ended up spending a lot of time together, chatting about this and that and generally having a nice time. Honestly, Sunny couldn't complain. As far as companions went, the charming archer was not the worst option. Plus, their conversations were extremely entertaining. Kai had a lot of fun stories about his life as a celebrity, while Sunny had plenty of macabre anecdotes about his life in the outskirts. Their life experiences were so vastly different that it was almost as if they were from different worlds. As a result, both felt like they were listening to fictional stories about some strange and fantastical land that they had never heard about before. Sunny spent the rest of his time training with the sword, trying to turn shadow dance from an ethereal concept into a practical set of core principles. The progress was painfully slow, but now there was progress. At least he was having so much trouble because his chosen battle style was so strange and elusive. Unlike most styles, which started with certain movements and steps. This one was supposed to imitate any movement and any step instead of introducing its OW and .SO. It was more about the state of mind and the flexibility of his physical behavior. Sunny had to create a set of training exercises that would allow his body and muscle memory to become capable of adapting to any style and turn pliable like a shadow. On the first day of trying, his whole body ached. Despite his incredible physical shape and experience with tough training, Sunny ended up straining the muscles that he didn't even know he had, and forced those that he didn't know about to behave in a way that was utterly different from what they were used to. Actually, his previous training was even detrimental to the whole process. He had to make himself unlearn a lot of things to allow for this strange style to take root in his very bones. Thankfully, the foundation of his technique was Changing Star's flowing style, which itself was designed for maximum adaptability. If Sunny learned another style or was further into mastering any existing technique, this would have been 10 times harder, if not impossible. Needless to say, his exercises were in no way similar to the beautiful and graceful dance he had seen in his dream. In fact, from the side, Sunny must have looked as though he was having a seizure. He caught more than one amused stare while practicing. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that he was slowly pushing himself toward mastering the basics of shadow dance, and hopefully, receiving his first relic.